Hey guys, so today we're going to focus on the social reform that we saw happening within the progressive era because of all the movements that we've seen so far. So, we've already talked about the muckrakers, the people, the journalists who exposed so many of the problems that were happening in society. Then we talked about the political events that took place because of the muckrakers, and we talked about Teddy Roosevelt, Taft, and Woodrow Wilson, and the major progressive movements that they pushed through politics. So today we're going to focus on how society then started to reform other areas, and we see people pushing reform elsewhere in society to try and make some more changes and move forward in America. So, we're going to first talk about women's rights and talk about women that pushed for political rights. And really, the women's rights movement started with something that we call the temperance movement. So, women definitely faced a lot of physical and domestic violence because of abuse of alcohol. Women were facing issues in the home from their husbands, and also children were facing a lot of domestic violence as well, because there really was a problem with the consumption of alcohol in this country. So the temperance movement is trying to limit alcohol consumption. And with this movement, it wasn't so much about trying to take away the right to drink. It started out with just trying to limit it. And a lot of the reasons because of this is really because of violence. A lot of people don't realize, but back in this time period, we had states where the age of consent was actually all the way down to the age of 7. That means that if a child was sexually abused, they were 7 years old, men were able to get away with this because it was the age of consent. So, in a way, the temperance movement is kind of our first Me Too movement. It really was about trying to protect women from abusive men. And so, this temperance movement was one of the first ways that women started to get politically active. So, from it, women were actually able to achieve complete prohibition, which meant that the manufacturing and sale of alcohol was completely illegal throughout the entire country. And that is with the 18th Amendment. So once women started to have progress in politics and actually were able to achieve this movement, they then focused their attention on women's right to vote. So, with the women's right to vote, we're going to see this start the suffrage movement. And suffrage simply means the right to vote. With that being said, women helped tremendously during World War One, and World War One was happening in the late 19 teens, from 1917 to 1920, where women were a crucial asset to the war. They were contributing in factories, they were working for the war, and so when they showed that they were able to contribute economically, they also then fought to contribute politically as well. So one of the major leaders was Susan B. Anthony, and Susan B. Anthony is going to be one of the huge pushes to actually get the right to vote. She was at one of the first women's rights conferences in Seneca Falls Convention in 1848, and she's still fighting for the right to vote by 1920. Susan B. Anthony was actually arrested multiple times because she disguised herself as a man to go and vote. And finally, in 1920, women were granted the right to vote with the 19th Amendment. If you look at the year, we're coming up on the 100th anniversary of that, and some of you are actually going to be able to vote in the 2020 election. And so it's definitely a memorable year and definitely a year to commemorate next year as we move into women's history. With the women's suffrage movement, the women were definitely showing that they're able to be contributors politically, not only with prohibition, but also with suffrage. So, with our progressive amendments, we're going to look at 4 major progressive amendments that were passed to help society and to help with some of the issues that were happening during the Gilded Age. So the acronym I saw is going to help you remember 16, 17, 18, and 19. So the 16th Amendment, Congress was able to pass an income tax. Now, you may remember last unit we talked about a political party of farmers that wanted to have income tax so the government could have more money and also to help kind of distribute money from the wealthy to the poor. Hopefully you are recalling the Populist Party because that was one of their major goals was income tax. Another amendment that got passed during this time was the direct election of senators. And you may recall this was also another goal by the Populist Party. So the Populist Party was able to get most of their goals accomplished. The last two have to do with the women's rights movement we just talked about. 18th Amendment is going to be prohibition of alcohol. So no alcohol is going to be produced or sold in the country. And the last one, the 19th Amendment, is women's suffrage, and women were granted the right to vote, definitely broadening democracy in the country. So after women, seeing women's actions in the progressive era, women were one of the biggest active groups in the progressive era. And another woman that we must give credit to is Jane Addams. Jane Addams is actually going to start what we call social work. She is going to be a leader of one of our big progressive movements, which we call the settlement houses. So Jane Addams is definitely going to start being more active in society. She definitely cared about stopping child labor. She cared about women's suffrage. She actually even won the Nobel Peace Prize later in her life, and definitely see her as a very active progressive. She started what's called the Hull House, which are settlement houses. The first one, the Hull House, was in Chicago. And when she started this, it was to provide opportunities for lower class people. She especially was there to help immigrants. Getting them to assimilate, to learn the language, to get a job, to just learn the culture of America. And she is going to provide opportunities not only for immigrants, but she also really loved helping children. She's going to help teach literacy and help give children more of an opportunity because one of her biggest passions was to end child labor. So the last two that we're going to talk about is the African American Civil Rights Movement, which you guys are going to do in your graphic organizer that you're going to pick up from the substitute. So you are going to be comparing Booker T. Washington, who is from the South, and W.E.B. Du Bois, who is from the North. And we see at this time period, African Americans face very different issues in the North and in the South. So what you're going to do on your organizer is you're going to read the articles that are posted on Blend over Washington and Du Bois. And on your organizer, you're going to take notes of their goals. What are they trying to achieve? Basically, your goals is what are they hoping to do? The strategies is how they're going to accomplish their goals. So, did they create any organizations? Did they create any institutions? Did they protest? What were their strategies to try to accomplish their goals? And then, did they achieve anything? What was the outcome of their strategies? What did they accomplish with their movement? So after you're taking the notes, you're then going to complete the Venn diagram on the other side of the paper. And when you're finished, you're going to turn that into the substitute.